What is going on, guys? Welcome back to another video. This video is specifically for PvP and how not to suck at PvP. If you are struggling, or you're totally confused, or a complete newbie, or even maybe a veteran that needs a few finer details or a few tips just to get you through and improve your gameplay experience, especially with the new PvP event that's coming up soon. I think it's in the next month. I've got some nice tips for everyone, or if you just want to get into it and you want a general guidelines. So it's going to be a long video of me rambling on. So, but there will be some very useful tips here. So get ready and we'll start. So first things first, this is for a general PvP build. And what I mean by a general PvP build is you want a build that can sort of fight 1v1 or 1vx, which means 1v against more than one player. You're not sort of ganking or just a heal bot, or you just want a general build where you can fight one-on-one with someone, or support your team and just generally just be a normal PvP player. So you're not deliberately leaning into pure damage or pure healing or pure tanking. You just want to do a bit of everything and just have a general build to fight people. So the first thing I would say is pick a class that suits your play style. And by that I mean, do you want a play style that's super fast mobility? Or do you want something that's like a turtle up tanky sort of thing? Or do you want to be a shield stacker? Or do you want to have insane healing? So pick a class that suits your strengths. An example would be, say, a Templar. They're very tanky and can do a lot of healing, more standing you grand. Whereas, say, a Dragon Knight is sort of similar as well. It's more sort of defense and standing you grand, unless obviously you're doing like a leap. But it's not really a run and gun sort of build. It's more sort of taking, absorbing damage. Or you've got, say, the Sorcerers, which is sort of more mobility, escaping, similar to a Nightblade, with faster movement. Or you've got the Wardens with the high health and the healing and sort of burst. Or you've got the Necromancers, which is also burst and sort of tanky. So it's very much just pick a class that will suit your play style and how you want to go. It doesn't matter if you want to change your class. You can always make another character, but just stick with a class and let that be your base. And the next thing is to pick a race that suits you. Race doesn't particularly matter in PvP too much, unless you want to be super high level, but even then it's very much just pick what character you would like to play. Obviously some do have advantages over another. I would say if you do want to pick a class that sort of has a little bit mixture of everything, I mean, you can pick races that are better at recoveries and can take more damage, say like a Nord or a Breton, so you have better sustain, but they lack the damage. Or you can pick a Dark Elf or a High Elf, which have they have the damage, but they don't have a lot of resistances. Or you can go Khajiit for more critical damage. It's really up to you, but one I would personally recommend that's underplayed a lot is the Orc, as it has a mixture of everything. It has the damage bonus, it has a speed bonus, which is unique as well, and it also has a health bonus, so you're getting a bit of resistances from like the health added, so you're going to get extra health, you're getting the damage, and you're getting mobility. So I think Orc is a perfect choice for everyone, as it suits a lot of play styles. And also, if you do later down the line want to get sea serpents and things that snare you, that 10% unique speed buff from the Orc is very nice, and it's very hard to come by a lot of speed buffs. to compensate for that. So Orc, you just can't go wrong. But obviously just pick what race suits you. It really doesn't have a massive advantage. It's only going to make a 5% difference on your actual build. So just pick what suits you. Next we'll move on to say Alliance. So Alliance is, you've got the three, which is Daggerfall, Covenant, the Aldmeri Dominion, and the Ebonheart Pacts. Again, just pick which one suits you. Just be wary that they don't have any advantages over one another as such, but just be wary that when you go into a campaign it does lock and you can't switch between different characters and campaigns, so just be careful of that, but it will reset once the campaign's done. So I tend to just have all my characters on just one alliance so I can switch between characters. So maybe you can have a mixture, but just if you do like to play lots of different characters, maybe don't have them all spread across different alliances, in case you do fancy playing that and then you'll have to be forced into a different campaign you might not want to play. The next is all the side sort of class lines, which most people should know, but just in case, make sure, if you're not, unless you're running a werewolf, always have vampire on your build for the 30% undeath passive, so that damage reduction. Always have that on, as that's going to help you out greatly. Try and get your Undaunted if you can, as that's going to give you bigger stats and you'll get better synergies. And also, if you are building into crit, make sure you have the Sigic line, as you're going to get movement and crit, and you also get the Deliberation, which is another 30% damage reduction when you're channeling stuff. So, and you get a little shield as well. So they're little added things that are probably worth getting. And other examples are, say, the Fighters Guild or Mages Guild. Fighters Guild, every skill you put on will give you more weapon damage. And you also get a bonus for fighting vampires, which everyone's a vampire or werewolf, so that's also useful. And obviously Mages Guild as well, which can give you extra max magicka, and the Comet is also quite nice, but it's a bit of a grind. So, but they're extra skill lines that are very useful and should definitely be utilised. And obviously the basic ones are your race skill line, and the light, medium and heavy armour skill lines, and obviously your class skill lines and the weapon skill lines, which are all just sort of like the basic ones. So now we'll sort of move to how to sort of actually build your PvP character. So what I would say is, by PvP, from a newbie standpoint, is that you want to be doing all three roles. See, when you're playing PvE, you can play just a damage role and have basically no healing or survivability, and you can pretty much rely on your group. It's always nice to have a bit of extra healing or tankiness, but that is a DPS, and a healer would just be supporting your group with buffs and healing, keeping everyone alive, and obviously a tank is absorbing all the damage and staying alive. So in PvP, essentially, you want to be doing, instead of just one role, you're essentially doing all three. You want to be able to do damage, you want to be able to heal, and you also want to be able to take damage. So it's just basically, PvP is blending all three roles, instead of PvE, which is basically, or normally, just one role. So how do you do that? So these are just sort of like guidelines on how you would like to build your character. So first things first is your resistances, your physical and spell resistances. They are capped at, say, 33,000. You won't be able to get any more mitigation than that. I think that's 50% damage mitigation. So in PvE you wouldn't go over 33,000. But in PvP, enemies will debuff you with, say, minor breach or major breach, which just them two combined will take about 8 or 9k resistances. So say if you was at 33,000, the 9k is going to drop you to, say, 24k resistances already. So my advice is just to keep, if you can, it can be difficult because obviously you're trying to balance everything. It's all about balance. try and get your resistances to say around the 30k mark. I think is the sweet spot for PvP. If you can have more, the better. You know, you can build beyond 33k because it's not wasted in PvP, as you will constantly be debuffed. But I would say a minimum is probably say 28k, 28k minimum to around 30k is around sort of like an optimal, most common resistance baseline. And the next one is obviously you want to have critical resistance. You do have a base critical resistance, but you want to be added into it because obviously if someone is running critical damage builds, critical resistance will reduce the critical damage they are dealing to you. So I think the base is around 1,000 or 1,400. So just you can put impenetrable on, or say run rallying cry to get your critical resistance up. I think it does have diminishing returns, so I would say a minimum of 2,000 critical resistance is still low, but it's better to have a little bit more than nothing. You can also use the blue CP resilience to add a bit more critical resistance. I think it gives you about 600. So I'd say a minimum you want to be around 2k. Ideally, is probably about 2.5k critical resistances. So just try and get them into that range if you can, just to mitigate some of people's critical damage, as people are running super high crit builds, and I might be one of them. So the next thing you have to decide is that was your resistances and critical resistances. The next thing is damage. So do you want to build into critical damage or raw damage? So if you go on your stat sheet, you'll be able to see that it will say critical damage. You do get a base 50%, but it doesn't actually show you that. The cap of critical damage is 125%, but again, that is only in PvE. In PvP, you can build beyond that. So it is possible to go much further, because even though you'll never do more than 125% damage on a player, they will have critical resistance, so that is going to reduce your 125% bonus, say if you was at the cap. So if you have 140% critical resistance, critical damage, sorry, then they're going to drop that down. So even the base will take some of it off. So make sure so don't worry that you can't go really too high with critical damage. So you can stack a lot of things into critical damage, running medium armour, the Shadow Mundus, running Order's Wrath, the CP for more critical damage. But just be wary, like I said, that people will be running high critical resist with a lot of rallying cry. So you can either build into crit, or the opposite you can do is you can build into raw damage. And when I say raw damage, that is things like things that just say damage done, like Malakath's Band of Brutality. That will reduce your critical damage, but it will increase your damage done by, like, say 16%. So you can stack things that say damage done, and just stack weapon damage and damage done, and just ignore critical damage. You can go either way. They can both be very effective, but obviously you want to go one or the other. You don't want to be doing two. You don't want to put on, say, the Shadow Mundus and run a Band of Brutality, reducing your critical damage. So you want to go one way or the other. Most people go the critical damage route, but you can go raw damage and still be very effective. It will give you more sort of flat damage, consistent, whereas critical damage is usually less consistent, but you'll get big numbers. So the next thing is obviously make sure that you are stacking into weapon and spell damage. To boost it optimally, you can run Nern-owned weapons, and like swords or great swords, as this will boost the weapon damage modifier up, so you want to get that quite high. A guideline I would say is probably, it depends on what actual build you're doing, but I would say to aim for at least 5k plus on weapon or spell damage to hit reasonable numbers. Obviously you can go all the way up to 10, 12k weapon damage. Just make sure it's not too low. You want to make sure that you're hitting reasonable numbers. Pen is the same, so this is penetration of their armour. If you say that someone had 33,000 resistances, the penetration cap is 18k or around that, in PvE anyway, sorry. So the most you can get in PvE is 18,000 is around the cap, but in PvP there is no cap. So you can just go beyond 18k penetration. You may not have the 18k penetration on your stat sheet, but again, if you had the minor and major breach from a skill, from 2 skills, then you'll get 9k straight there, which that won't show on your stat sheet. So say if you had 10k penetration on your stat sheet, if you put the minor and major breach and combine that and just do the math, then you say you've got 19k penetration. So I'd say a minimum in PvP ideally is around I'd say the 18 to say 20k is a real good penetration level. It sounds a lot, but like I said, you only need about 8 or 9k actually on your sheet, and then you can get it from other sources, running light armour, running sharpened weapons, and it will easily stack up. And then obviously with your debuffs you can easily get to around 20k, which I think is a good balance. Optimal stats, I mean the stamina, health and magicka. I would recommend in PvP scenarios you really want to be around the 30k health if you're a beginning player or just an intermediate or even an advanced player. 30k health. Obviously top tier people can get away with less health if they're shield stacking and they really know what they're doing, but I would say a general baseline is around 30k health to prevent you getting ganked. You could even go a little bit, I still feel a little bit uncomfortable around the 30k. I think 32 is probably optimal just to stop people one-shotting you. If you're running 20k health or 25k, you're in the one-shot potential. So it's always best to stack a bit more health. Try and 30 to 32k I would say is optimal. Again, the maximum stamina magicka, it can fluctuate a lot on different builds, but I would say keep them at least above, I would say 16k. 15 to 16k is the absolute bare minimum they should be, and you should only be running them if you've got really high recoveries anyway, with say like Jewels of Misrule food and recovery Mundus. But if you've got very low recoveries, it's probably better to have higher stat bars. So try and get, say, the magicka and stamina to around like 20 to 25k, as that will give you a bigger bar to work with. But if you do run them low, make sure you've got good recoveries. And again, the next piece is the Mundus. The Mundus stones are great because you can just switch between them to suit your play style. And I would always recommend, if you have a build set up and you feel like it hasn't got enough damage or it hasn't got enough healing, just play before you start spending money and fiddling around with sets and stuff and changing traits and doing that. Just play around with the Mundus. Sometimes a Mundus change is all you need. If you feel like you haven't got enough penetration, then swap out the Mundus to the Lover. Or if you feel like you need more recoveries, then put on a recovery Mundus. Or if you'd like a bit more critical damage, then put on the Shadow for more critical damage. Or if you feel like you're not critting often enough, then put on the, I think it's the Thief to, increase your critical strike chance. Or if you feel like you want more health. So just play around with the Munduses before you actually start tampering with the build, because normally a Mundus is all you need to change, just to, play with the build first. What is it lacking? Do you feel like it's lacking recoveries? You just keep running dry and just change it accordingly. And again, we'll talk with recoveries. Recoveries are quite important, as this is why a lot of builds actually fail, is that you'll stack too much into damage and become, say, a glass cannon, and you do need recoveries to sustain. If you get involved in a particularly 1v1 or a long fight, or if you're being 1vx'd against multiple people, you need plenty of recovery to keep them skills popping. So I would say again, a guide of what your recovery should be. Health recovery doesn't matter too much, as that's pretty much redundant now with the vampire. The two main to focus on are the stamina recovery and the magicka recovery. So I would say a baseline of the recoveries is probably about 1.5k each is probably the minimum you want to be getting away with. Obviously, ideally you want to be around the 2, if you can, 2.5k mark, and that will keep your bars running nice and smoothly. And because the worst thing that can happen is that you just run so low on stam, you'll get CC'd, which is crowd controlled, so you can't move, and because you haven't got enough stamina, you can't pull away, and that's 9 times out of 10, that is why people die in PvP, is that they are CC'd and they've just got nothing left, the bars are completely gone, and then they will just wreck you. So, but if you have them recoveries coming back up, you can get out of them CCs. You can also use potions as well to make you immune to CC for a short amount of time. But in general, make sure your recoveries are fairly high with food, a recovery Mundus, or even on the jewellery enchants, maybe chuck on a reduced cost reduction glyph, or maybe even just put a recovery glyph on of either magicka or stamina, and just play about with it. Just make sure that I wouldn't be going to like 1k recoveries unless you're doing a glass cannon build or a gank build. You can get away with lower recoveries. Or say if you was on a 1 bar build, you can get away with slightly lower recoveries, as you're not buffing as much, you're not pressing as many skills. But like I said, this is from a general 2 bar general PvP build. You want to have the recoveries, I'd say around the 1.5 minimum to 2k to be optimal. I think you can go all the way to say 3k recoveries. I think that's probably overkill. I think 2.5k is probably the highest you would need to go for a general build. And the next piece of advice is just don't worry about being the best, chasing people, getting frustrated. You're going to die in PvP. No matter how good your build is, there's always someone that's going to counter, and that is the good thing about Elder Scrolls. You can build this to counter that, and there will always be someone else that can probably get around what you're building towards. So just don't worry about being the best. Just all you hope to be is just be average. You don't want to be a noob getting slaughtered, and obviously you want to try to be better, but you don't have to be the best player on the battlefield. There's always someone that's going to kill you and ruin your day. You just want to be an average PvP player that gives as good as it gets, and that's quite easy to achieve. But don't get frustrated and try and be number 1, because you're only going to become disappointed. But obviously that then brings on to the next point, is just practice. The more you practice with your build, the better you will get. Don't chop and change too much. Just stick with it, and you'll get used to reacting to certain players and the way people play. And if you are a beginner, you can practice on training dummies. Obviously, the training dummies don't fight back, but just practice buffing up your skills, and then your rotation of how you want to attack, of what buttons you want to press. And once you've got that sort of nailed down, and you feel like you know what to throw, when to heal and stuff, I would recommend, if you don't want to attack any human players at all and you're really new, I would say go to Craglawn, as the mobs are quite aggressive there and they will put you under some sort of pressure. Or you can do a solo dungeon even, because then essentially you'll have to, what I said at the beginning, you'll have to fill all 3 roles. So do like a solo normal dungeon, And then you'll have to be the healer, you'll have to be the DPS, and you have to be the tank. So say you're fighting a boss, you're going to have to do all three of them, and that's essentially what you do in PvP. Obviously it's not going to mimic a human player, but fighting a boss on your own is going to create that element where you need to be doing the damage, you need to be healing, are you sustaining, and are you you're being able to absorb the damage. So you can easily master a PvP build fighting bosses, until you get to that point where you want to fight human players, and obviously that is a different dynamic in itself, but the baseline is the same, is that you have to fill all three roles to stay alive. You obviously want to do the damage, you want to heal, and you want to stay alive. And I think, hitting mobs or bosses that are fairly challenging, that you can kill, but it would just put you under a bit of pressure. There's no point in fighting against mobs that would just go down in a couple of hits. You want something that's going to actually dish it back, maybe even a couple of one-shot mechanics, just to really put you under pressure. So yeah, that's pretty much it. My guide on how not to suck at PvP. So hopefully these tips have been useful for beginner players, and hopefully even advanced players might get a few tips or ideas or things they might have not known that I've shed some light on. But yeah, hopefully it's just a general guide, and I hope it helps people. Hopefully it encourages people more into PvP, as I know a lot of people don't like it and they find it too challenging. A lot of PvP games can be challenging, as you're going to be up against people that are very experienced, but it doesn't mean that you can't dish it back. So if this video helped you, please drop it a like, and if you've got any more questions or queries, just drop them in the comments. And if you like the video, please subscribe to my channel, as that will greatly help me out. I'll do lots of builds and guides and tip videos, and I've got plenty more to come. So yeah, that's it. But yeah, stay tuned for the next video.